All right. I know we see the numbers trickling in, but it's 5 o'clock. I'll give it a few more seconds. As yeah, the numbers keep going up. That's exciting. Okay, yeah, I'll just go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone. My name's Natalie Ballou. I'm the Program Associate for East Asian Studies here in the Center for International Engagement at Trinity University. And I'm excited to be speaking alongside these 3 faculty members, as well as one of our Chinese majors, as we discuss China's environmental struggles for the next hour or 75 minutes. So just to go over the structure of this webinar is similar to our first one from last month, where we will first hear brief presentations from each of the panelists. And we will be aiming to contextualize both the environmental situation in China, as well as the environmental policy comparing between China and the United States. And following the presentations, our student moderator will be leading us through a Q&A session. And I encourage you all to submit your questions using the chat box function throughout the lecture. And I would especially encourage our students to be in the audience to ask away. So yeah, with that in mind, I'd like to hand it over to our student moderator, Anna Lund, to introduce herself as well as introduce our panelists.
Hi, thanks, Natalie. So our first presenter is Dr. Dan Lerman. Dan Lerman is a professor in the Geoscience Department at Trinity. He has conducted geologic research in China for 30 years and teaches the study abroad course, Field Geology in China, and the seminar course, Geology, Resources, and the Environment of China. Today, he will present a summary of the basic geologic framework of China and how it sets up China's environment and environmental issues. Go ahead, Dr. Lerman.
All right, let's get the screen share going here. Share and play. All right, so I'll start off with a geologic map of China, and lots of colors here. All of the colors, they represent different rock types in the bedrock of China. We don't need to look at the details of all those different rock formations, but instead look at some major features. So you see some linear and some curvature features, and each of these are major mountain belts across China. So this is the Qinling Mountains. Going up to the northwest, this is the Tian Shan. And over here, the Kunlun. And in West China, the biggest of all is the Himalaya and the Tibetan Plateau. And of course, all of these mountain ranges are produced through plate tectonics. So this is the main point of my presentation, is that there's 2 factors that set up the environments of China: plate tectonics and the monsoon climate. And so for plate tectonics, the outer shell of the Earth is composed of a series of lithospheric plates, and these plates move around and interact and carry continents around with them. And in the big picture, here in the Permian, all of the continents were organized into a large supercontinent called Pangaea, that is except for China. And so China and Asia were actually a series of small continents in an archipelago out here in the Tethys Sea. And they translated, moved northward and collided with Asia. So North China docks up, then there's South China, here's Tibet. They move northward, and eventually India also moves northward and then collides with the whole mess. And so in the lower left here, you see a plate reconstruction of China, and the collision of each of these plates is what produces those mountain ranges. And India, furthermore, is pushed under China, uplifting the Himalaya and the Tibetan Plateau. So this is a summary of the different mountain ranges in the upper left. In the upper right here, we have a digital elevation map. And so the white color here are extreme elevations, more than 5 kilometers above sea level, up on the Tibetan Plateau. And this sets up what we can call the grand staircase. So there's an extreme drop in elevation from the Tibetan Plateau eastward across China. The next major factor is the monsoon climate. And so what you have is an oscillation between the extremely wet summer months and the dry winter months. And this is set up basically, in the summer, solar energy heats up the continent and provides expanding rising air masses, and that produces low pressure areas and draws moisture onto the continent from the oceans. And it drops all that moisture during the wet season. All that precipitation up on the Tibet, Himalaya, and also across South China feeds the major river systems. So here you have several rivers, and I just try to point them out. I've listed them also. The New River, the Lansong River, the Yangtze River, and the Yellow River that come across China. And of course, the rivers don't just carry water, they carry massive amounts of sediment that are deposited out on the floodplains. And this is really important because it produces really excellent agriculture land. And so if you overlay this with a map, down below here is a map of the population density of Asia. And you see that the great population density sits in these river floodplains. So you have the Yellow River here, and over in India, the Ganges River in India. And so these places have these large populations because historically, this is where agriculture started and where the Chinese civilization began. In addition to that, you have massive flooding during the rainy seasons. And this is, where the part of our title, humans must control nature comes from. Over the centuries, there was a great pressure on the emperors of China to control the rivers, to dam the rivers, to control the floods. And in addition to controlling floods, in recent years, of course, the dams are important for hydroelectric power. And China has so many dams and the greatest hydroelectric capacity in the world, and also the biggest hydroelectric dams. It's important to provide energy to China, but also causes major environmental issues. And of course, one of the things is just trapping the sediment behind the dam is going to starve the downstream areas from the sediment that would nourish the floodplains. South China is wet, and you see roaring rivers in the summer. But in addition to that, you also develop karst landscape. So here you have the tropic climate and a lot of vegetation. This produces carbonic acid in the water, in the groundwater. And that dissolves the limestone, producing caves. And then you have sinkholes as the caves collapse. And you see this sinkhole, if to the right, we were to produce another sinkhole, then there'd be sort of a tower of limestone remaining in between the sinkholes. And that's what produces the tower karst. Each of the towers are sort of remnants standing high after the surrounding areas have collapsed in sinkholes. North China is a desert. And so the winds blowing across this desert over geologic time have accumulated massive deposits of wind-blown silt on an area called the Loess Plateau. And this is really spectacular. This really thick, yellow, fertile sediment. But it's also very vulnerable to erosion and desertification. And so this is an old photo I took in 2007, but I can overlay that with more recent photos. And this is the big reforestation effort that's gone on in North China to rehabilitate the Loess Plateau. And it's one of the big success stories for China for environment. And it's not just North China, all across South China. South China as well, there's also major reforestation. With the water scarcity problem, there's also the south to north water transfer project. And I'm not going to go into the details of this, but there are canals taking the water from the Yangtze River Basin north to water-starved Beijing. And it's like the hugest water project ever. And I don't think that the environmental consequences of this are yet even fully understood. China is rich in coal and poor in oil and natural gas. So in the upper right, we have a basic geology lesson. You find coal and oil and gas in sedimentary basins. And these are, I put a few circles on here to indicate these are low areas between the mountain ranges that I pointed out earlier. Coal resources are the greatest in the north part of China. And this is problematic because that's an area of water scarcity, and it requires a lot of water to process the coal. China also has natural gas resources, but the gas is more limited because all of the faults through these basins has segmented the reservoirs and also allowed the gas to escape to the land surface. So there's a limit to the amount of natural gas available. And of course, this is a problem for China because natural gas is actually a clean fuel that can help displace the use of coal, which is very important for mitigating the severe air pollution problems that China has. And then finally, there's another big resource. This is the rare earth elements that occur in the Banyobo mining district in North China, the biggest rare earth deposit in the world. And of course, rare earths are important because they allow for China's green energy revolution. And again, there's two sides of the coin. So, producing all these rare earth elements also causes an environmental problem. There's a lot of toxic waste and water pollution that occur from processing the ore. And so this is sort of a summary. In addition to the geologic framework, I've also tried to bring out some of the major environmental issues, water, air, energy, and resources. Thank you. Now I got to unshare.
Thank you. Okay, next we have Dr. Zhaoxi Liu. She is a professor in the Department of Communication at Trinity. She teaches a class on environmental communication in China. Her presentation today is about from grassroots struggle to national priority, the big shifts in China's environmental policy. So hopefully she'll be able to explain a little bit more some of the policies that Dr. Lerman touched on.
Thank you, Anna. All right, so share the screen. Okay, so this is my title. Anna already mentioned that. All right, so I kind of want to provide an overview of how China's, as a country, the mindset toward environmental protection has changed over the decades. So this is a Mao era poster, and it also, the characters there basically says, the big character says, human must defeat nature. So it is like a Mao Zedong era slogan. And the smaller character says, what is there to fear when sky and earth fall apart? We use our hands to build a new world. So this is really describes the kind of mindset of the Mao Zedong era, including the Cultural Revolution. And and Mao Zedong himself is a big champion of this mindset. Basically, we can do everything and anything, and we can do what we want. And so this is him, a picture of him in 1952 visiting the Yellow River. And the Yellow River has been, for thousands of years, a major problem for China, for the rulers of China over thousands of years, because it floods. And so every ruler in China always tried to tame the Yellow River. And so with the spirit of humans must defeat nature, what Mao Zedong envisioned a way to tame the Yellow River is to build these dams. So this is actually the Sunlen Gorge hydropower plant, and it was built during the Mao Zedong era, and it turned out to be one of the biggest disasters of, basically in human history of dam building. Because like Dr. Lerman already mentioned, Yellow River carries lots of sediment, and it carries so much sediment that it basically blocked all the generators and all that, and it also blocked a lot of these floodgates. And so this dam right now is barely functioning, and to me, my understanding that it is more of an eyesore than anything else. And so this is just one example of the result of this kind of foolhardy spirit. Like we just will do anything, whatever we can think of, and completely disregard of science and nature's needs and natural rules. And so China really paid a lot of environmental prices because of that. So after the Mao era is the Deng era. So Deng Xiaoping is the next sort of primary ruler in China, leader in China. And the Deng Xiaoping era basically is the 1980s, 90s, and also the first decade of 2000 of the 21st century. And so these decades are basically marked by an obsession with money making, with economic growth. So here is a GDP curve. You can see how China's economy grew exponentially during this time period. And so it is true that, this is, in terms of economic growth, it is astonishing achievement. And just to give you some snapshot how China has changed over, those years, this is a picture of Shanghai, the bond in Shanghai, which is like the commercial area along the Huangpu River. That's what it looks like in 1930s. And then in 2015, when I took Trinity students to Shanghai, this is what the bond looked like in 2015. So indeed, China has achieved something, a lot of people consider unimaginable. China has become a lot richer, people's lives are a lot better. But at the same time, China again paid a hefty price in terms of the environment. So in 2007, China overtook the United States as the biggest emission of carbon dioxide in the world. So right now, ever since then, since 2007 all the way up to today, China contributed over 1/4 of carbon emission, total carbon emission emitted by human activity every year. So it's like 25% to 27%, and that's because China's crazy crazy economic growth, and like Dr. Lehrmann just told us, China's main power source is coal. All those coal burning to power factories, production, consumption, and all that make China the biggest carbon emission in the world today. And so this is a chart, and this line here, this line that goes crazily up, that's China, okay? So, and this is a picture, a local news report of a picture on November 9, 2015, and that's in Shenyang, Northeast China. And these carbon emissions are not just numbers, they actually have real impact on people's life. So on that day, the PM 2.5 index in Shenyang went through the roof. And when people had to go out, some of them are wearing a gas mask. So that just shows you how bad air pollution has become in China during those years. And not just air pollution, water pollution, land pollution, and just all kinds of environmental problems that you can think of. China has been suffering a lot from that. So that is basically what happened during the Deng era. It's basically a story of economic growth, and then at the price of environmental protection. And so people actually, they have noticed that ever since the 1990s, people have noticed that, but the government basically turned a blind eye to environmental problems because they're obsessed with GDP numbers. And so in those years, in those decades, it's mostly grassroots organizations like this guy, Yu Xiaogang. He is the founder of a NGO called Green Watershed. It's people like him who are fighting pollution, and they often are at odds with the government. And so during that time, really the environmental protection, the costs for environmental protection were mostly taken up by grassroots organizations, and they're often doing that at really big political risk. Some of them were jailed, some of them were ordered to dismantle their organization, and all that. And this is a cover story about him and his group's struggle to stop building dams on the Nu River. And you just showed the map that Dr. Lerman showed, and so Nu River is on the southwest border of China. So that's sort of like the picture at that time. And then Chai Jing, this is a Chinese journalist, Chai Jing, and her documentary Under the Dome, which documents China's air pollution, is what I consider sort of like a closure of that time. So this was released in 2015. And so it is a closure of the time when environmental protection is mostly talked about and fought for by grassroots. But after that, after Under the Dome already signals that the government is starting to change their behavior and their mindset. But one thing I want to note is that Chai Jing was able to make this document, which is a really in-depth investigation of how China come to have such bad air pollution. She was able to do that only after she has left China's central television station, which is like state-owned, China's biggest, most powerful television station. And she wouldn't be able to do that when she was a employee of that state media. So that says a lot about, during that time, if you want to fight for the environment, if you want to say something about that, you're basically just at odds with the government. But like I said, things started to change once Xi Jinping came to power. So there are three big things that Xi Jinping's government has proposed that has something to do with environment. And all of these things are at the national policy level. These are like the top level policy. So first of all, he proposed China needs to have China needs to win 3 key battles. And so these includes completely eliminate poverty, and this is about preventing major risks. And the third one is about pollution prevention and the cleanup. So he has put, so Xi Jinping and his administration has put fighting against pollution as one of the key battles. Another thing is Xi Jinping, once he became the leader, he has been a champion of the idea of the Chinese dream. And as part of the Chinese dream is to build China into a beautiful country. So the beautiful China idea is part of the Chinese dream. And so that's like a philosophical, sort of like grand level idea. And the beautiful China idea is also closely associated with another big idea, which is promoting ecological civilization. So ecological civilization is a concept that is proposed as an antithesis to industrial civilization. And industrial civilization is basically the civilization mode that human beings has been pursuing or has been taking up ever since industrial revolution in the 18th century. And so it's all about building machines, altering the nature, exploiting natural resources, massive production and massive consumption. So that is industrial civilization. And the ecological civilization is trying to change all that and is trying to promote a more eco-friendly way of production and consumption. And China is trying to be a leader in that, in promoting that kind of idea in the world. So these are like the 3 big ideas, and that really, and to implement those big 3 ideas, there are different levels of policy. So one major policy is China's 5-year plan. So in China's latest 5-year plan, which is 13th 5-year plan, environmental protection and ecological protection has become a very prominent part of it. So this is People's Daily website. They have a whole section about how the 13th 5-year plan is putting environmental protection and improving China's environmental quality as a major part of it. So I will just let you quickly read through, some of the content there. So basically, not just like clean this up lake, clean up this lake, or restore that forest. It's about overall. So China sets a pretty ambitious goal to improve China's ecology, at a grand like overall ecological state quality. So that's a very ambitious goal. And then internationally, China also is doing something. So China pledged to Paris Agreement that in the past, in 2014, over 64% of China's energy comes from coal. And then in 2017, China is cutting down to 60%. So as part of the Paris Agreement, China is to gradually reduce coal emission and wants to peak carbon dioxide emission around 2030, which is just around the corner, basically 10 years from now. And then we'll increase non-fossil fuel share to around 20%. I think this is actually wrong. This is from the New York Times, but I think it's by 20% rather than to around 20%, because China already have 20% energy comes from hydropower. And so that means China is going to add this much renewable energy by that time, by 2030. So that's China's promise to the world. So not only China is doing this domestically, but also pledging in the world to try to become a leader in cutting carbon emission in the world for the sake of the planet. So that is a chart from provided by the International Energy Agency. And so you can see in 2016, China's energy sort of composition still has nearly 60% of coal. But if China implement all those policies that it has promised, then by 2040, then the coal burning will decrease to just 30% of China's energy source. And China is going to develop, wind and solar, hydro, and like Dr. Lerman mentioned, northern China is very windy, so that's a great place to set up the windmills and things like that. So that is what China is trying to achieve. And people are also really, when when things in a country like China, when things start to happen from top down, it usually becomes more efficient. If it's just a grassroots struggle, it's going to take much longer, much more struggle to achieve something. But if the top level government realize, oh, we need to do this, then things start to sort of a cascade in a really efficient manner. So on the ground, these are pictures I took when I went on the trip with Dr. Lerman in Guizhou. So these are just like billboards they set up in the mountains. And so this billboard says, restore farmlands to forest. That's the reforestation effort that Dr. Lerman was talking about. So this is in Guizhou, Southwest China. So that's one billboard. And then another, I mean, Chinese people love slogans. So there's slogans everywhere. We're just driving on the road and I just snapped this. And then this is another kind of billboard about reforestation. And it's saying that they're gonna build a eco-friendly Yilong. Yilong is a city. And then another, like I said, Chinese people love slogans everywhere. But this is a very famous saying from Xi Jinping himself. And he said, green water and green mountain is gold and silver mountain. I probably should put R. So gold and silver mountain in Chinese people's sayings means wealth. And in the past, people were destroying mountains and destroying water, lake in order to build factories because they think they can make money that way. But you know, Xi Jinping is trying to change the mindset with all the beautiful China, Chinese dream, ecological civilization ideas to tell people that no, we need to preserve the green mountain, the green water, because that's where the wealth is come from in the future. So I think that says a lot about how the mindset has changed a lot from destroying the nature to build whatever we want to just want to get GDP regardless how the environment is suffering, to a new idea that we have to be eco-friendly, we have to preserve the environment, preserve the ecology, because that is where the future is. Otherwise, we just destroy our future. There's no wealth. If you can't even have, if you don't even have physical land you can stand on, how are you going to make any money? So that says a lot about a major mindset change. So to conclude, to just wrap it all up, from the Mao era to today, Chinese people's mindset has changed a lot. And that leads to policy change, and that also leads to practice change and hopefully different outcome. And China is taking environmental protection really seriously, from the top level all the way to every single citizen. I mean, I have witnessed the grassroots working, you know, so right now, not only the grassroots they're still working very hard to protect the environment, but now what's different from say in the 90s is that they are no longer so often at odds with the government. Now they can work with each other because the government has recognized the importance of environmental protection. So there's no doubt that environmental protection has become a national priority in China. However, you know, as the Chinese saying goes, future is bright, but the path is winding. Sometimes, you know, for the sake of economic growth, because that's still another national priority, you still see sometimes like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, that kind of thing happen. So, well, I do believe that China is setting the mind to protect the environment, but I don't think you're going to see that, you know, there's no frustration, there is no sort of roadblocks. There's still many challenges ahead, but we just hope for a better future. Okay, that is my presentation. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Liu. Next, we have Natalie Ballou. Natalie is the East Program Associate and a 2017 Trinity graduate with a BA in History and Chinese Studies. She also has a Master's of Arts in Climate and Society from Columbia University and is in the process of applying for doctoral programs. She is a 2020 Blakemore Freeman Fellow and will be studying in Taiwan this December through August. And her presentation will be an overview of environmental policy in the United States to be in contrast to the presentation we just heard about environmental policies in China. So.
All right, thank you, Anna. I'm just gonna jump right into it as soon as I share my screen. And here we go. Okay, so, sorry. After hearing this context of China, like Anna had just said, and what we had just listened to, I am here to kind of provide a sort of US perspective when it comes to the government's response in handling environmental policy and the climate crisis as well. So, spoiler alert, the US has almost had the opposite situation when it comes to how environmental legislation is enacted these days. but it's not also just the current administration. Historically, a lot environmental activism and sort of policy is largely bottom-up activism and legislation. And so for my brief time, I'm broken down this question according to what does the United States do at the blank level? And so kind of do level of magnitude when it comes to answering this question. So first off is, let's start big and dial it down. So international efforts. This is where you hear Paris Climate Accord, Kyoto, Copenhagen, insert city name, etc. So this is part of the UNFCCC, which is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change that was created in 1992, actually signed on by George H.W. Bush, fun fact. And it's an annual forum where policymakers from each country come to set goals about how their country can contribute to reducing global carbon emissions, as well as provide a space that tries to keep everyone accountable. And so much geopolitics go into these annual meetings, but just to summarize, two of the major debate points or the things, points of contention that deeply and primarily involve the US and China are one, historic responsibility, and two, the developed versus developing countries, which are of course very interrelated as well. And yes, China and the US are the two major countries that are under the spotlight as they are the top two emitters. And so for one, in terms of responsibility, it seems easy enough to look at who has produced the most carbon dioxide and then tell them to, hey, maybe don't produce as much anymore. Like you can be the target to cut it back. But I guess to show a little bit of like what I mean by responsibility and historic, I'm going to show a quick little infographic, and let's see if I can do a new share here as I have it set up. So there, I think we can see the screen. And so there's no sound, so I'm going to give a running commentary here, but you see here from the 1850 to 2017, these top 10 are primarily, you just see European countries and United States. And the 1850s is a landmark because that's when the Industrial Revolution happened in these countries. And so you kind of see here that now during the Gilded Age, that's when the US kind of takes off, kind of leaving the other countries in the dust a little bit in terms of environmental growth. And now we see World War I happening. So there's a lot of shifting happening below there, and as well as Germany rising as well as USSR. You can kind of see China starting to peak in, I guess, in the early 18th century. But now you see with Mao Zedong is obviously in power now with 1949, and it kind of rose up there, but then Cultural Revolution made it kind of jump back down. And 76 is when Mao Zedong dies, and now we are entering the era of socialism with Chinese characteristics, where we now see this skyrocket as kind of more capitalistic economy is introduced. And yes, we see it now just kind of skyrocket into the lead. And also you see India here as well start taking off. Anyway, so let me share back to the other screen. Yeah, and so that's I like using that graphic there. And then for the second one, in terms of the developed versus developing, that kind of complicates the fact, like China's obligations to cut emissions, is the fact that they're between these two countries, or these two categories of countries, which of course the terminology has changed. It used to be Annex 1, Annex 2, as well as developing and developed. I like to view them historically as the colonizers versus the colonized. So the ones who tend to go in and extract resources. And, but anyway, this distinction between the two categories has to do with having a high per capita income in GDP. And the per capita here is the kicker. So as you saw, China and India were skyrocketing in terms of like development and such. And a lot of the cities and urban scapes are very developed by like, say, Western standards. However, looking at the per capita, they are still considered developing countries. And thus they are not held to the same level of obligations as, say, developed nations within these meetings. And so, yeah, the elephant in the room is whether these developing nations have a right to use fossil fuels in growing their economies as did developed nations throughout the last 150 years. And so, yeah, surprise, the United States has historically struggled with the concept of reducing emissions when it comes to global power in play. And that's kind of why Obama signing the Paris Agreement was such a monumental like point in time, because there was so much back and forth about the United States not signing on to anything without China also being obligated to sign. But anyway, currently in the international scene, there is very little happening in terms of what the US is doing in the current administration. And they mostly show up to these meetings and kind of twiddle their thumbs at the moment. And so in terms of going down to federal, the answer is very similar, where there is not much currently happening. If anything, it's more backward, I suppose. So each representative who goes to these COP meetings then returns back to their home country, and it's kind of expected that the federal government is the one to lead the charge for implementing the targets that they told the rest of the world that they would contribute. The Trump administration has become more known for undoing many of the policies that were set to contribute to the national goal, as well as ultimately pulling out of Paris for economic reasons. But even before Trump, climate and environmental legislation at the federal level has always struggled. There's only been a handful of really major acts, including the Clean Water Act of '72 and the Clean Air Act of '70. But then, and the latest like major piece was in 1990, which were amendments to the Clean Air Act. Though a difference at the federal level that between China and the US is the fact that we have a judicial system that can sort of hammer out a lot of illegalese. So like with the Massachusetts versus EPA case in the early thousands, that kind of gave us that gave the government the responsibility of regulating greenhouse gas emissions. But that was a huge legal case. And of course, the Clean Power Plan from Obama era was just repealed during the Trump administration. And so, yeah, federal level has always kind of struggled. And so moving on is when there's roadblock at the federal level, states tend to have a lot of power when it comes to creating policies or programs to mitigate their emissions. So despite the lack of political will at the federal level, many states and cities have actually stood up to say that they will continue pursuing the US target contribution agreed at Paris, in spite of the actual federal government pulling out. So basically, governors from, say, California and New York in particular, but also the city of Chicago, have come together to say, we will continue to mitigate our emissions and try to keep on pace at the US. And they can still go to these meetings at the international level, they just have no voting power. And they're kind of just people who are flying on the wall and trying to help save the US image in this landscape. And so, yeah, actually California is itself a leader on a global stage in terms of reducing its emissions while maintaining a growing economy. And so, yeah, continuing down is the local level. And so cities actually have even more agency to create climate action sustainability initiatives that have very tangible goals directly related to the specific location in terms of like the climate and existing and expected impacts on the community. And so, yeah, they are very specific for a local context that, like, say, for instance, San Antonio has a climate action plan, and two of the major points happen to be related to water, since that's a water shortage, as well as heat and energy usage, as we are very reliant on our AC units during the hot summers that will only get warmer and put more stress on the system. However, like, as great as this sounds, city budgets are of course limited and politics play into it. So the cities that are opting for this are predominantly large urban cities who have the interest and financial capabilities to create legislation, but often have to find themselves at odds with a disinterested state and federal government, as well as, you know, other players in the community and all along the way. And so it's definitely, as Zhaoxi was saying, it can be not as robust as they ought to be without a top approach. And so to end things off is even smaller level is As we are speaking through an academic institution, I want to note how academia in the United States also has stepped up in creating their own initiatives, whether it's, and as educational centers, they can largely have a focus on incorporating climate change awareness into curriculums, in addition to having their own opportunities to mitigate emissions, as campus buildings are very energy intensive and we travel a lot when it comes to professors and going abroad and such. And so in comparison to the top 25 liberal arts institutions that the Trinity administration is wanting us to break into, all of these places have climate action plans and have had them established for over a decade. Trinity does not, and not one is really in consideration right now. However, something that I've been working on within our Center for International Engagement is creating such a sustainability plan that does touch on these things, where we can hopefully be one of those bottom-up approaches within our own university, where we plan to mitigate our emissions that come from study abroad and international travel, and also be more intentional of incorporating climate awareness within our own internationalization efforts. And so yeah, on that note, I look forward to hearing your questions and discussion in a few minutes. Thanks.
Thank you, Natalie. And yeah, like Natalie said, please remember to submit your questions to Q&A. But before that, last but not least, we have Dr. Lyons. She is a professor in the biology department at Trinity. She is a botanist and ecologist who studies the influence of diversity on ecosystem functioning and invasive species dynamics. She teaches a range of biology courses as well as a study abroad in Latin America and China. Her current research is focused on the restoration of Texas grasslands and rangelands with particular emphasis on improvement of soil health. Dr. Lyons, go ahead.
Great, thank you. And I am sorry for the distraction. The best laid plans. I forgot my son had a piano lesson and he started playing piano, so I had to leave. So apologies for that. But I want to talk a little bit about being an environmentalist in China. That's going to be what I bring to the table. I'm not a Chinese specialist. I'm really a Latin American specialist, but I was asked to teach in China twice. And I did get to learn a lot about the ecological civilization movement there. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what I see as the differences between being an environmentalist or an ecologist in China versus being in the United States. So I'm going to share I have a very, very short, just very few slides to show you. One of the things that I did want to talk about really briefly was just the scale of things in China that's very different. There's a saying, and what we talk about as Latin Americanists, that when the United States sneezes, Mexico gets the flu. And that goes back and forth now more and more between the United States and Mexico. But in the same way, in the way that China's managing its natural resources, this is really important to everybody in the world, right? Because it's such a large country and there's so many humans there. There are over 3 billion now, right? That they have a major impact. And we've really been able to see this with the whole COVID pandemic of how the satellite imagery has demonstrated how the atmosphere has even cleared over China in dramatic ways, right? That we never would have anticipated before. So the world needs to care a lot about what China's up to. And no one could have prepared me before I went to China. I did a lot of reading. I read vastly. I learned a lot about some of the things that Dr. Lehrmann and Dr. Liu already told you, and to be very soon, Dr. Ballou told you about China, but nothing prepared me for the scale of not only the projects in China, but just the natural beauty of China and the elements, just what was going on as far as like rivers. You would stand on a river and just be like, wow, we just don't have anything like this. Or stand, just amazing just the sheer scale of things. The extreme beauty really goes along with the extreme biodiversity as well. It's a country of very, very high biodiversity. And some of the things that Dr. Lehrmann already discussed, is my voice working okay? I was having trouble with my mic earlier. Okay. Dr. Lehrmann showed with those geologic maps showing that China has a very long history of having been isolated and tectonically. And so that means it has a very unique biodiversity, but also the sheer number of geologic formations that are there also lend itself to a high plant biodiversity. And then when you have high plant biodiversity, this lends itself to higher food web level diversities. So it's just a country of enormous, enormous biodiversity, and the center of biodiversity for many of the world's plants and plant families. In particular, plant families that we use a lot horticulturally, right? So all the magnolias and all these things, all the azaleas. People love azaleas, right? And the center of distribution is really in China. and also for all the citruses. I mean, it's just amazing. It just goes on and on. I don't even know where to begin. I just would get into a market in China and just be overwhelmed with the biodiversity of the things that people there just eat on a day-to-day basis. So it's interesting when you think about these wet markets that we've been talking about, where the COVID pandemic likely originated. And I hate to say that it probably wasn't from bat populations. I mean, that people are faced in China with, they understand biodiversity. They're extracting resources from this major, really diverse ecosystem that they have. And they're actually closer to nature in many ways than we are on a day-to-day basis. And I would say some of that is because they have been a poorer country, or have been a more rural country in many ways, more agronomic. And they're just closer to their resources. And I would say that they're just that makes them have the potential to do a lot better job on the environment because of that deep knowledge. So those are some of my biggest impressions. Some people in my field could kid around about, oh, to be totalitarian or authoritarian for a day, just to make some big sweeping environmental changes, policy changes. You know, we could do so much if we could just have control for one day. And in many ways, that's how China operates. And I have a colleague, Steve Wisnant, who's one of the world's leading authorities. He basically wrote the textbook on how to do restoration. And the Chinese, you know, they're so good about going around the world, handpicking people, bringing them and asking for their expertise. And Steve Wisnant says that, well, he was brought there. They would drive him to a place. They would show him a dam, or they would show him a hillside, and he would say, oh, well, what I would do here is blah, blah, blah. And they would say, okay, great. And then they'd put him in the car, a fancy car, drive him to the next place, take him out and say, what would you do here? And he would say the same thing. And he said he went back 5 years later and they had done everything he had recommended. And he said to me, I wish they'd given me a little bit more time to think about it. You know, I would have, there's a lot more I would have said. I didn't know they were going to just like implement, you know, but they have this ability to do and implement. You think it, implement it so fast. So I was going to say three things that I'm really jealous of as an environmentalist when I was in China. One is their long history of connection, the connection between humans and the environment. That's very much an integral part of the belief systems. You know, I know that they don't like to talk about religion a lot, but there's an underlying belief system that's solid on the environment. And as much as they want to get away from it with some of these urban, more Western looking sort of tendencies, they've got this beautiful rural tradition that I hope they don't lose, and I hope they preserve. And I have talked about that to a lot of Chinese people, like, what are you doing to preserve all this knowledge, this agricultural knowledge, or this resource extraction knowledge that goes along with that biodiversity? And it doesn't seem like there's a plan for that, but that's kind of unfortunate, because that sort of beautiful, I would call it provincial, but in a nice way, in a really positive way, knowledge is being lost really rapidly. But that nature is now really fundamental to the public policy of the country. This ecological civilization movement is beautiful. I mean, to incorporate that into, you know, essentially as a constitution is a very powerful place to be. There's only few places in the world that give any credence to nature at that level. Nicaragua was one of the few countries that put it in their constitution after the revolution. Of course, that's eroded, but those are good moves. And also this ability to be able to make decisions so quickly. The authoritarianism, I guess, I don't know what you want to call it, that isn't unfair, but just that ability. And then sometimes people are critical of China for the cronyism or things like that, but I don't see that as really any different than what happens in the United States with lobbying and capitalism, you know. So there's always politics involved in all these decisions, and there's people who benefit from their positions, or, you know, all sorts of that. I don't see it as that different, except that it can be less transparent. And I guess Dr. Liu can speak to that much better than I can, but the lack of transparency is, of course, an issue. Those are my thoughts as an environmentalist being in China, and I just recommend if anybody can get there, they do it as fast as possible. It's so beautiful. Okay, let me stop sharing. Awesome. Oh, I had one more picture. This is such an awesome photo from the Shangri-La. Basically, it's a national park in the borderlands of Tibet, and they're very controlled. They had all these really great walkways. It's a beautiful, beautiful park. So I'll show that.
Thank you, Dr. Lyons.
Yeah.
So with that, I think we have about 20 minutes or so to do a Q&A. But obviously, if you need to go for any reason, please feel free. So I think first I'm going to start with this question that Dr. Field posed. about the concept of an ecological civilization. And before I get to that question, I think I want to ask Dr. Lyons, just from an ecologist perspective, what does that term mean, and what does that look like from like in application? What does that look like?
The ecological civilization.
Yes.
Well, I mean, and it's to be more ecologically minded as a civilization, right? It's like a shortcut for that, right? To be more ecologically minded. But I think with every single resource extraction move, that you're conscientious and thoughtful about that. That's what I would.
Yeah, so that ties into what this question is asking, which is how that term is not merely about environmental protection, but it's also emphasized as the cultural dimension of development. And I guess this is for everyone, but can you give examples of how this policy has addressed the cultural dimension of the economic development of nature? Maybe Dr.
Well, I guess I can say a few things about that. Kelly, are you going to say something?
No, I just
okay.
Just the economic development of nature. I just think that's a funny phrase. Sorry.
Yeah, so let me just give you an example of Guizhou province, because I went to Guizhou with Dr. Lerman, so I learned a lot from that trip. And so Guizhou is a sort of like a pivotal or like a sample province for implementing ecological civilization. And the cultural dimension of that is that Guizhou has traditionally been very rural. And when we were there, we see the Miao people, which is ethnic minority people, they just farm in a tiny little piece of land on the big mountain because they don't have this vast, like flat plain. They don't have it. They only have a tiny little piece on one of those staircases, as Dr. Lerman showed you, in the big mountain. So, and they use bison to farm that little piece of land. That's part of their culture. That's their way of life. And then, so if Guizhou is going to implement ecological civilization, then to me, they're going to preserve part of their way of life. Maybe they're not going to use bison to farm forever. They could use a handheld, like a motor powered, some kind of tool. But I think in a province like Guizhou, ecological civilization means preserve part of their traditional way of life. And that is a cultural dimension.
Cool. All right, so the next, there are a couple questions about kind of the role that grassroots movements play now that China, I know Dr. Liu was talking about now that they've shifted to more of a top-down approach with their environmental policy. So in what ways what role do the grassroots organizations hold now in terms of impacting, influencing environmental policy in China? Again, I think that's probably more.
I can talk a little about my personal experience where I worked with somebody who was who had established a butterfly reserve in Hong Kong, and he was a extreme he was a specialist in butterflies, and he really had to work hard for that. And it was because there's such a long British tradition in Hong Kong, and that sort of overlay of like almost Victorian in a way, it was relatively easy. He felt it was much harder to do in mainland China when he moved there and began to work in a grassroots way. It did not feel as if, and it could have been because he was from Hong Kong that this was his perspective and was not from China, mainland China, but he seemed to feel a little bit like it was a little bit more hopeless to start in, but that was in southern China. Maybe other parts of China are different. I don't know.
Right.
That was my personal experience.
Speaking from, I did an internship with a NGO in Shanghai that was focused on environmental conservation. And I had a similar experience with the founder of this organization who seemed kind of almost disheartened by the state of environmental movement in China.
And underfunded, yeah.
Right, and he sought a lot of his funding not from the Chinese government, but from foreign embassies and foreign organizations, and collaborated with them to work towards his goals that he wanted to achieve. So I thought that was interesting as well, in my personal experience.
Well, and we saw this also in the Shangri-La National Park. We talked to a lot of the locals there, and a lot of the things that they wanted to do, they brought in the Nature Conservancy, and there were some controversial things that happened there that I never did get to the bottom of. I don't think, Natalie, it was like really, really messy, clearly. But it seemed like the national level decisions that were being made, they were kind of picking and choosing what people wanted on the local level, and there was a lot of disenfranchisement, especially among Tibetans. It's tricky. That happens here too, though. Let me just say, like, I've seen so many disgruntled environmentalists. Come on, it's like, I don't know that that's specific to China.
You mentioned your experience in the national park, and that was kind of what came to mind when I thought of ecological civilization, was this like living alongside of nature and nature preservation. And so I don't know if any of the panelists can talk about a little bit about what that looks like in China and how those beautiful areas are being preserved.
One point I could make about Guizhou is that I
hear you, Dan.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. I can hear you.
All right, I unmuted it. So, but I was going to say that I think in Guizhou province, I think that the economic development, because it's a very rural area, you know, there's big development in the cities, but there's also development in the rural areas, and I think the environmental improvement and the reforestation that's gone on and that I've seen over the course of 30 years there has been tremendous. And it's not just the reforestation, but the government has worked with them to build cisterns and water supply and plant new crops. And I think the farmers have become, their living has become, it has been so much better. And the little towns have become cleaner. And it's just the environment has developed and become so much better for the people in that situation. And of course, those areas in the rural don't have issues with air pollution either. So they're not seeing the real negative aspect of some of the environmental problems that other parts of China had seen. They did have problems with water pollution for some time, but then I think China also got a much better handle on water pollution. So improved.
And pesticide, herbicide use as well, and nitrogen. They've gotten better they've been educating people really widely on that, on fertilizer use, and super smart.
Yeah, I remember when I first started working in China 30 years ago that I didn't see any birds, you know, and there weren't any insects either. And so the environmental devastation was really severe in the rural areas. So all these things combined have really created a much better life for those people and a much better environmental situation.
So Natalie, there's a question here from Dr. Tam directed towards you about how you explained how the power to implement policy in the US is dispersed in a way that is not in China. Could you talk a little bit more about how much power grassroots transnational movements for climate justice might have globally? And I think that we can also kind of maybe talk about how China has influence to be kind of a global example for other countries who are struggling with environmental issues.
Yeah, definitely. So even back in 2016, when I was sitting in both Dan and Zhaoxi's classes as a student, as I took both of their courses related on this topic, we were discussing this idea of like China developing a soft power, or like kind of using this angle of environmentalism as a soft power influence to kind of take that global stage. And that was before the US election, where it kind of gave them full permission to go ahead and take up that lack of space where the US was kind of trying to be better about it during the Obama administration. Something that, and so nowadays that seems to be pretty clear, although China's very quiet about doing that in many ways. They don't like to make a lot of noise when it comes to sort of this influence of soft power. I mean, China also has projects that go on in Africa, for instance, where they fund a lot of major projects that kind of just influence the geopolitical landscape, but again, aren't major sort of announcements or proclamations to the globe that say sometimes the US would tend to do, especially since the US is much more forthcoming. Well, not really anymore, but they used to fund a lot to the Green Climate Fund, I believe is what it's called. I'm blanking on the specific name, but that's like the fund that's attached with UNFCCC that kind of supports projects for the developing nations who want to like implement sustainability projects. But anyway, going to the the non-party side of things with the movements. Yeah, I mean, Greta Thunberg, like rising up, like, or, you know, kind of, I guess, spearheading this kind of, especially the youth movement of like climate activism. It's very fascinating in different elements because one, there are activists all across the globe actually, but she kind of was able, somehow in the space that she was able to kind of rise up as the face of it. I mean, even to the Times Magazine cover in ways that say climate justice activists in Africa did not have that ability. If anything, they were cropped out of photos where then it would just be European students who decided to, I guess, advocate for climate instead of going to school. So there is that element of privilege there that I do want to kind of touch on. So that like the climate justice movement is kind of like, to get into the like language, like it can be very finicky when it comes to race as well. And that's something where we're trying, like a mainstream environmental movement is trying to get more diverse and trying to be better at including voices of, I mean, to say developing countries, but getting those activists and not just portraying them as like kind of weak or whatnot. But as for the impact on the COP meetings, I think it is being more just like, I feel like it will have a very big role. Unfortunately for this year, the COP got delayed till 2021 because of COVID. And so it's a bit unclear to see just what impact local activists had. There are more rises in like, say, I guess like year-long internships for students to get involved with activism and such across the globe. And a lot of these groups do show up at the COP meetings. Like I mentioned, like with states and cities showing up, anyone can really attend, I believe, especially if they have some sort of, like with the paperwork. So say there's a lot of indigenous populations who kind of come together across the globe who then say protest or at least show up to like try to get their voices heard. And so that's something where I think with combined movements with the Black Lives Matter, this like there could be a really good opportunity for especially the environmental movement to kind of introspectively see what issues that that the mainstream movement is predominantly white and has an unfortunate history of like where outsiders still go in to spaces and claiming, you know, that whole debate of like of reducing emissions and whatnot, and telling other nations that, oh no, like you have to do this sustainably. That's kind of where I was touching on, like with that sort of finicky question there of like how to handle development and such. But anyway, I think I ranted on a bunch of different things there, so go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. And Dr. Zhang was wondering, have you like about your development of the Trinity sustainability and how does looking, yeah,
I can touch on that too. So this is a plan that is like, so there's 3 elements to it. One is mitigating our emissions when it comes to flights and stuff. And that's like the kind of like just the most climate directly mitigating our emissions, trying to identify which flights we can like say neutralize and such. And then the second part is incorporating, is addressing our programming and curriculum and trying to incorporate climate change as a learning outcome for our programs, both on and off campus. So we do teach a handful of classes as well as have webinars, kind of like this, where we do talk about it a little bit more, or even like if it's a subject like on business, somehow be able to incorporate it in ways. And then the third is more very much specific to our department, where in our own day-to-day operations, hopefully trying to include more intentional sustainability choices with like, say, plasticware versus or single-use stuff as opposed to like other things. But yeah, that's kind of the overview of it that has been in the process. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, we have about a few more minutes, so maybe a couple more questions. But next for this question for Dr. Liu, how does the growing wealth gap in China shift the ability to help the environment in China? How does this gap, as it continues to grow, influence the ability to have these ecological reforms?
Okay, so I think just like in the United States, there's this problem of environmental justice. So in China, it has been places like the Eastern Coast, places that are more fluent, they do better job in protecting the environment because people have the demand and they also have the resource. Like the West Lake, well, what I learned is that the West Lake is in Zhejiang province, which is super rich. And the way they try to clean the West Lake, which was heavily polluted, was just dilute water. They change the water like every 2 months or something like that. That requires a huge amount of money. But they have the money to do that. They can just wash out the pollutants and keep the West Lake beautiful. But that probably is not possible in a poor province. And then some of the richer provinces are thinking, okay, we're going to protect our environment, so we're going to shift our polluting factories to poor places because they need factory, they need jobs, they are going to be willing to do this, and we're going to just like export or outsource our pollution. So that is happening in China as well. So that takes the central government to really sort of China's central government is so powerful, they can basically do anything, and whatever they say, the provinces will have to follow. And so
Josie, wouldn't you say that the United States did that to China for a long time?
Yes, yeah.
So the same thing
has been exporting pollution to the entire world for decades.
Right.
Yeah, so similar, really similar. So the central government need to coordinate, and then at the same time, some of the poor provinces, they want to defend themselves as well. Like Guizhou, once again, Guizhou is a very poor province. They decided that we don't want factories. We want ecological civilization. We want eco-friendly development. So they develop eco-friendly high-tech industry. They develop eco-tourism and things like that. They don't want those polluting factories. So yes, there is definitely struggle there.
So how did they advocate for themselves? And so they were advocating from the grassroots for that, right? And then the government listened. So how did that go well, or how? I'm interested in that process.
The details of process, I don't know for sure, but I think one thing provinces like Guizhou can do is to tell the central government that we want to be a sort of like a pilot or a experimental province for ecological civilization. So give us that power, give us that policy, so we can say no to those polluting factories. So that's one way they can do. And the central government implemented this framework, which is to build ecological civilization to allow these provinces to do that. So there is some kind of like a tag of war between the central government and the local government. Even though the local government have to listen to the central government, sometimes they have to, there's some kind of power struggle going on as well.
Definitely. Okay. I think my last question, just to wrap up, is related to the title of this webinar, the struggle between human defeating nature. And I think many of the presenters touched upon kind of these philosophies that have existed over thousands of years, that there's this history of connection between humans and the China that is very unique. And Dr. Liu mentioned how in the Mao era, it was more about we just trudge forward and we can create a new world with our own hands. And humans are very much the creators in that environment, whereas now the philosophy is much more about protecting the environment. So I'm going to open this up to all the panelists. To what extent are those philosophies at work in Chinese environmental policy, in their moves to protect environments and their mining, whatever it is, and how do we see that play out now in terms of its role, the role of those philosophies in the minds of everyday people?
I think China's in for a bit of a struggle in that regard because of the growing middle class. There's not as many people have cars there per capita basis, but that's going to change. Or when we went to Shangri-La, the planes were full of very, very young Chinese people who were new professionals and want to fly and spend their money and see China, right, and see the rest of the world for that matter. I think that's going to be their biggest charge is growing that middle class and doing it in a way that isn't going to look like the United States did not so long ago, right? 50s, 60s. I don't, considering the number of people there, that's going to be a big impact.
Yeah, and speaking of just going off what Kelly was saying, it's also precisely because of Chinese people's aspiration for middle-class life. They want a clean environment. So they don't want to go out and see everywhere just dirty, garbage everywhere, and pollution everywhere. And so in those affluent cities, they put a lot of money, a lot of effort to beautify, the cityscape and to clean up their river walk and to clean up their river so they can have river walk. People can jog, can walk, and things like that to improve the life quality. So Chinese people have come to realize that if you want to have a better life, if you want to improve your life, the quality of your life, you have to protect the environment. So I think that everybody has agreement, but at the same time, because of the middle class thing, that means huge amount of consumption. So how are you going to balance, the desire to consume, which, generates all kinds of pollution, and desire to have a nice environment? I think that really is going to be a century-old question, and it's not easily solved.
Yeah, and it doesn't help with the materialism and all the, the shared media, right? That promotes that materialism. Yeah, let's see how it goes.
Yeah,
Definitely.
just to hop on like what you both said too, it's like something that like kind of similarly concerns me with the rise of the middle class is that they want to live like a kind of more, I guess, like a higher standard of living, even though they don't want to see the pollution. The sort of options that are, or the solutions that are being proposed to tend to be kind of sort of tech fixes as opposed to lifestyle sort of shifts, say with the North to South Water Diversion Project, or even just like, I know that there was a project in, I believe, I can't remember which city, but it basically implemented this giant air purifier in the middle of the city. So like some sort of like, kind of like, not a Band-Aid on the problem, but a very different approach in like actually say mitigating and, that sort of like concept of living more sustainably. That's something that concerns me a little bit, but also fascinates me in terms of like, I mean, even with the hydropower, in terms of like the massive dam that it does produce a ton of very renewable energy, but at the expense of very devastating socio-environmental factors. I mean, the displacement of 1.3 million people for the sake of this project, and with the price tag too. That's just something that like I find very fascinating about China, why I'm really interested in this region. That yeah, no one else in the globe really goes for these options or even has them on the table, and yet China tends to be the one who goes for them.
All right, I think with that, I'm going to close up the Q&A unless any of the panelists have any final thoughts or remarks. Okay.
Thank you, Natalie and Anna.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Organizing.
I'll take it from here. Yeah, so thanks to everyone for joining us today. Yeah,
Sure. Thank you.
yeah, I apologize for the questions we didn't get to, or were just answered in chat. But yeah, please thank me in joining, or please join me in thanking our panelists. Even I guess we can't really clap, but I'll clap for you. And the moderator for all our time and expertise today. And yeah, thank you for taking your time, participants, on a Wednesday afternoon to learn about the environment in China. So yeah, have a wonderful evening, everyone. We plan on doing more of these sessions in the years to come, and the months to come. And also we have some great study abroad programs on the environment and China that if this kind of piqued your interest, you should check them out. So those are the Ecological Civilization in China, as well as the Field Geology in China program. So yes, thank you so much. Bye.
Great, thanks.